Senator Cotton.
Judge, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
I want to return to Senator Grassley's questions about the Durham investigation. Senator Grassley asked you if you would commit specifically to ensure that John Durham had the staff, the resources, and the time that he needed to complete that investigation. You said you didn't have the info yet, that you needed to speak to him, but you had no reason to think that him staying on was not the correct decision.
That's right, yes.
Why can't you commit specifically to saying that he will have the time, staff, and resources he needs to complete his investigation?
Well, again, it's because I'm sitting here and I don't have any information about what he needs in his resources and how and the allocation of resources. But everything I know sitting here suggests that he should, of course, have those resources.
Judge, 2 years ago, Bill Barr made that exact commitment about the Mueller special counsel. He did not have that information. He had not consulted with the department. He was in the same posture you are. He simply said yes. Why can't you say yes today the way Bill Barr did 2 years ago?
Again, my view about every investigation and every decision I make is I have to know the facts before I can make those kind of decisions. I don't know what went into his consideration, but for myself, I have to be there and learn what's going on before I can make a decision. But as I said, I have no reason to doubt that the decision to keep him in place and to continue in his investigation was in any way wrong.
Was it wrong for Bill Barr to make that commitment 2 years ago?
As I said, Senator, I'm not going to be making judgments about my predecessors. I don't think there's any purpose in that for myself. I want you to judge me on my own record and what I do going forward.
Was it wrong for Democratic senators on this committee to repeatedly demand that Bill Barr make that commitment 2 years ago?
I think my answer would be the same.
Okay, let's turn to the death penalty. You said that you've developed great pause over it, and you said that Joe Biden expressed his opposition to the death penalty. Did Joe Biden or anyone from his administration, transition, or campaign ask you not to pursue capital punishment in cases against murderers or terrorists?
No. No.
Thank you. Judge, you spoke at the outset, asked to have several other senators about your outstanding work in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing case, in which you were part of a team that helped to bring to justice a white supremacist mass murderer, Timothy McVeigh. He was sentenced to death. That death penalty has been carried out. Do you regret the fact that Timothy McVeigh received the death penalty and has been executed?
Look, I supported, as I said in my original Senate hearing when I became a judge. Originally, I supported the death penalty at that time for Mr. McVeigh in that individual case. I don't have any regret, but I have developed concerns about the death penalty in the 20-some years since then. And the sources of my concern are issues of exonerations of people who have been convicted, of sort of arbitrariness and randomness of its application because of how seldom it's applied and because of its disparate impact on Black Americans and members of other communities of color. Those are the things that give me pause. And those are things that have given me pause over the last, as I thought about it over the last 20 years.
Judge, if you were confirmed as Attorney General and there was another case like Timothy McVeigh's where a white supremacist bombed a federal courthouse, killing 168 Americans, including 19 children, and your U.S. Attorney sought your approval for the death penalty, would you give him that approval?
So I think it depends on what the development of the policy is. If the President asks, or if we develop a policy about moratorium, then it would apply across the board. There's no point in having a policy if you make individual discretionary decisions. So if that's the policy, then that would be the policy.
So, Judge, you said in your opening statement, and in addition to several questions from senators, that you would strictly regulate communications between the White House, that there'd be no partisan influence. So is this a case in which there would be influence from the White House in individual cases? The U.S. Attorney was seeking the death penalty against a white supremacist domestic terrorist?
Oh, I understand the question. I'm sorry, maybe I didn't understand before. What I'm trying to say here is if there was a policy decision made by the President and announced by the President, he certainly has the authority to direct, and nothing inappropriate about it. It's within his authority to require an across-the-board moratorium. This is not, what I was talking about was not a decision by the President in any particular case or the direction of how any particular case should go forward, but of a moratorium which would apply as a policy across the board. The Supreme Court has held that the death penalty is constitutional, but it is not required. and that's within the discretion of the president.
Before we move on from the Oklahoma City case, let me just commend you again for your work on it and say that I believe Timothy McVeigh deserved the death penalty.
Thank you, Senator.
Another case involves Dylan Roof, a white supremacist from South Carolina who went into an African-American church and killed 9 African-Americans in a racially motivated terrorist attack. The Obama Department of Justice sought the death penalty against him and received it. Do you believe that was a mistake?
I'm sorry.
Do you believe it was a mistake to seek the death penalty against Dylan Roof for murdering 9 African-Americans as they worshiped in church?
I know I'm not supposed to be asking you the questions, but I have a feeling that this is still a pending matter. And if it is, I can't talk about a particular case.
In that case, let me ask you the hypothetical I did about...
I apologize for asking you because I know that's not my role.
Let's suppose that another white supremacist walks into another African-American church and murders African-Americans worshiping Christ in cold blood. The U.S. Attorney seeks the death penalty against that white supremacist. Would you approve it?
Again, Senator, I think it does depend on what policy is adopted going forward. I would not oppose a policy of the president because it is within his authority to put a moratorium on the death penalty in all cases, and instead to seek mandatory life without possibility of parole, without any consideration of the facts of any particular case.
Some on the left are calling for President Biden to grant a across-the-board commutation to all federal death row inmates to reduce their sentence to life in prison. Would you recommend to President Biden that he make such an across-the-board commutation?
So this is one of the ones that I would have to think about, and which I have not thought about. And I'd have to, consult with the administration on such an across-the-board policy. I haven't thought about that.
Thank you. I want to turn to racial equity. Do you agree that a core concept, Judge, of American law is that the government can't discriminate against a citizen on the basis of their race?
Absolutely. Equal justice under the law, written right there on the steps of the pediment above the Supreme Court.
And not only is it unlawful, it's morally wrong as well.
Yes, I think discrimination is morally wrong. Absolutely.
You're aware that President Biden has signed an executive order stating that his administration will affirmatively advance racial equity, not racial equality, but racial equity.
Yes, and I read the opening of that executive order, which defines equity as the fair and impartial treatment of every person without regard to their status, and including the individuals who have been in underserved communities where they were not accorded that before. But I don't see any distinction between in that regard. That's the definition that was included in that executive order that you're talking about.
So to you, racial equity and racial equality are the same thing?
I don't. This is a word that is defined in the executive order as I just said it. So I don't know what else. I can't give you any more than the way in which the executive order defined the term it was using.
Thank you, Judge.